Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You know what I like to do on my show. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want you fired up about my guest. His name is Nigel Mohammed, and we're talking about his book, Calling Men Out of the Cave. So you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on and get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Hello, Nigel. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Hi, Dr. Angela. Thank you very much for your invitation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, as is tradition around here, we always give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves to perhaps those few folks out there that may be unfamiliar with your work. So, first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What makes you, you?
Well, I'm a teacher of further education. I'm a mentor. I've been involved in mentoring. Obviously, I'm a writer. I've written a couple of books. I've worked with homeless men, younger men in a mentoring capacity. I've also worked overseas with women and children at risk and leadership development. So my great passion is helping to equip other people to live in a bigger story, in God's bigger story, a bigger story than themselves. And I'm currently developing a variety of courses related to that bigger story.
Now, being an author, is that something that you have always wanted to do, or did you find that life simply presented the opportunity?
I think, yes, life presented the opportunity. My journey into writing is related to my story. So I began writing diaries in my late teens, early 20s as a way of expressing myself. But then I began to journal. So I wrote journals, and I've been writing journals for 20 years. So then writing a book, it kind of came out of that long journey of writing diaries and journals. And then I wrote this book 10 years ago. So it was organic to my story, really, becoming an author.
Now, the title of your book, Calling Men Out of the Cave. Curious title. Please tell us, how did you come about such a title?
The title is from a chapter in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel chapter 14. And I was so inspired by a character called Jonathan, because he had such courage. He didn't have a good father at all. And yet, even though he didn't have a good father, he had this incredible courage. And he and his armor bearer, they were facing death, and they were prepared to live in a much bigger story than just living for themselves. And 600 men were hiding in caves. And the leadership of Saul, is what caused them to hide in caves, because the wider context is that Israel wanted a king of their own. They rejected God as king, and that was really the wider context. But Saul's courage is what really inspired me. Jonathan's courage. I beg your pardon.
Now, as far as the ideal reader is concerned, I always ask this question because I love to gift books, especially for graduation gifts. Would your book be appropriate for someone as young as high school, or would you say college age is a little bit better?
I would say college age is a little bit better. It is about manhood, fatherlessness, father absence, and obviously, children that have, many children don't have fathers. I would say college age because of the issues that I'm addressing in the book, the effects of fatherlessness and father absence, and the symptoms of that, but how not to be a victim, how not to be victimized by that, in order to live in a bigger story. So, yeah, definitely college age minimum, I would say, Andrew.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that clarification. We want to make sure that everyone who reads the book is able to really utilize everything that you're sharing there with you. Now, when you were writing your book, did you find that you needed any particular atmosphere or environment in order to really hear yourself think? I know many authors will say, well, I needed to be up early in the morning before, the world wakes up, or they wrote really late at night when everyone was asleep. Did that matter for you, the hustle and bustle of the day?
No, I definitely needed peace and quiet. But fortunately, when I wrote the book, I had time on my hands, so I treated it like a 9-to-5 job. And I had recently been married, so really the first 6 months of marriage, I was actually writing the book. Although the lounge of our apartment was a bit kind of chaotic with books and articles and everything all over the place. But I had peace and quiet, and I needed that peace and quiet in order to think and, to write the book.
I can definitely understand that. Now, what would you say is the most difficult part about writing a book of this style?
That's a very good question. What is the most difficult part of writing a book as this part of this style? I guess, being appropriate, because the effects of father absence, which is one of the major themes of the book, it's trying to be objective without, making judgments or victimizing people or labeling people. So it's trying to maintain the discipline of being objective of common denominators of what men and women can live with who have not been fathered well. Things like isolation, self-protection, and doubting yourself, that orphan spirit, that orphan mindset. So general sort of principles and common denominators that come from father absence. The discipline of that was a challenge.
And I love asking questions like this because I think it really helps inspire our aspiring authors out there to understand that sometimes there are challenges that you can deal with, that you can confront early. Some you have to kind of go through them in order to conquer them, but the goal is to make sure that the story is told and that the information is shared. So thank you so much for that. Now, from start to finish, about how long would you say that it took for you to write the book? I have interviewed some authors that said, Dr. Angela, it took me 15 years to write this book, just to get it right, be it that it was research or it was in the telling of the story and making sure everything was just so. But I've also spoken with folks that said, I was able to write the book within, 90 days, in 3 months. It was the publishing portion that took a little bit longer. When it came to the writing portion, about how long would you say it took for you to really get it all together to present in that finished format?
It took me 6 months to write the book, and that including the research, the writing, but also rewriting the outline, for example. It was an intense 6 months, but like I said earlier, I treated it like a 9-to-5 job because I had time on my hands to do it. So it took 6 months. And it was really it was like a process of spiritual birth. I mean, I believe God conceived it in me, so I carried it in me through the gestation period, so to speak, and it stirred and intensified within me. And then, finally, I kind of gave birth to it, so to speak, when it was finally published by a local publisher. So 6 months of an intense process of writing the book.
Now, when it comes to an overall way of how to read the book properly, I know that for many authors, they will give the reader the choice or can make the suggestion of how best to utilize the information that's placed within. Would you say that it is best to read the book from cover to cover, simply meaning page after page? Is it better perhaps to do it by section or by chapter, meaning read, chapter 1 before moving on to chapter 2? Is there a best way to make sure that the reader gets all of the information properly?
Yes, definitely chapter by chapter from start to finish, because there is a development. So from chapter 1 is that they were hiding in caves, and that's based on 1 Samuel 14, the 600 men hiding in caves. And then I develop it from there. So chapter 2 is under a spell about Western culture. Have men been under a spell of certain ideologies and the effects of that? And then, I go into historical, social reasons. So definitely, sequentially from chapter 1 to chapter 7, from start to finish, would be the best way to read it.
Thank you so much for that answer. Now, for your book, I can understand if some of the time in gathering information was critical, that you had to make sure that you had all of the facts together before simply sharing. With many of the authors that I talk to, it's science fiction or it's 1000% fiction, and it really doesn't matter if things are presented that red is red and blue is blue, if you understand what I mean by that, or pink is pink by that matter.
Yeah.
But you had to make sure that the information that you were sharing was correct and true. How did you tackle that part of the process of making sure that the research portion that you thought was needed was done properly?
Well, because I taught sociology, a lot of the research I did, was based on, statistics, empirical data. I did a lot of research in other men's ministries, which was to do with history, sociology, psychology, theology, biblical masculinity, what is that? The fact that Jesus was lion and lamb, what does that mean? So, I did look at different areas because it overlapped. It was very multidisciplinary. In those areas that I just mentioned, and other areas, culture, different changes in culture and society. So those are my areas of research that were based in, I hope, were based on historical facts.
Absolutely. And, there are folks out there that I think appreciate it when the author really spends that time to do the research and to make sure that everything is proper and true, and not just kind of leading them astray. Because for some folks, the only time they're really going to get the facts is when they read a book. There are many people that are not going to really dig deeper into Christian history, or they're not going to necessarily pick up their Bible and read all of the chapters, to get all of the background. So I can definitely understand that. Thank you for that added benefit there. Well, Nigel, it is time for us to go to break, but before we do, can you please remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And of course, how do we stay in contact with you?
Again, the title of my book is Calling Men Out of the Cave, and you can get a copy from this on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon and just put in Calling Men Out of the Cave in the search box. My website is lifequesttruth.com, and that's all one word, lifequesttruth.com.
Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is Nigel Mohammed, and we're talking about his book, Calling Men Out of the Cave. Nigel, my next question for you is dealing with what you wish this book to accomplish. And you kind of hinted on it before we went to break, but just in case there's someone who has joined us a little bit later in the show, what is your main goal? What do you want for a reader to take away having read your book?
Well, I hope that it will awaken men to live in a bigger story, to have the courage to face the ways that they have maybe been hiding in their own emotional, psychological, relational caves. There's lots of different caves that we can hide in that can be blind spots. Yeah, I'm hoping that it will mobilize men, but also women, to understand the effects of father absence on men and why men get stuck in their lives and stuck in stories of survival. I'm hoping it will give a broader context and a wider understanding of those deeper underlying issues that men live with as a result of not being initiated through rites of passage, because Western culture, we don't seem to have clear rites of passage. I'm really hoping that it will awaken people to bring those initiation rites of passage both back into the church and into the culture, to see that as essential.
Now, you mentioned, and thank you for saying that the book is also appropriate for women to be able to read, but that there needs to be more emphasis on the rites of passage for young men from one stage to the next. When you were looking at that, did you find that that men were able to make up in any way for the lack of what you're calling a rite of passage at any adult point in their lives, if they missed out on that as a young person?
What, did they have substitutes? Did they have substitutes, rite of passage? Yes, I think before the Industrial Revolution, in an agrarian culture, boys spent all day with their fathers, so they knew exactly what they were going to do. They learned the occupation of their fathers. After the Industrial Revolution, things changed, and the fathers disappeared from the home. So I think for quite a long time, we haven't had those very clear rites of passage. So I think, for example, if you think of gang culture, they create their own rites of passage. So a gang culture is like a surrogate father, where they create their own rites of passage. So that masculine energy goes into rather destructive ways rather than creative ways. So we definitely create our own rites of passage because it's very deeply ingrained and fundamental to us, isn't it? Rites of passage throughout all of our lives, men and women. But those rites of passage has not been actually that clear for men for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. So do you believe that for that man who is grounded in his faith, that the Bible gives men direction or focus, or help them to focus in on this is a passage that you need to take, or this is the direction in which you need to go, and having experienced this will help you grow in your maturity? I guess I'm asking, does the Bible help men who are looking for rites of passage if they feel that their culture or society is not giving them that? Do you believe that they're able to find it in Scripture?
Yes, absolutely. You can think of Moses, who spent 40 years in Egypt. And then he was driven out into the wilderness, and that was like an initiation that changed him deeply and transformed him. And you can think of Joseph, how Joseph was initiated through his own suffering and injustice. But even, and we can go through the scriptures with, Jacob as well, when he left his mother He spent 20 years with his uncle, and then he came back and he wrestled with the angel, and that was like an initiation where he was broken and then changed as he clung to the mysterious angel who was probably the pre-incarnate Christ. But, even Jesus himself, at the age of 12, he separated from his mother and then answered the call of his father and was about his father's business, because it is separating from the mother, and then the man takes over. So we can see from the life of Jesus that from the age of 12 there was a separation, and then he moved into his ministry, his calling. So all the way through the scriptures, God initiated men and women through those stages of separating them from what they were familiar with, into a time of transition that involved pain and suffering, before they were transformed and able to actually give and live substantially for others.
Now, by chance in your research, and you don't necessarily have to specify any particular answer when I give this, but asking very broadly, I know that from a cultural point of view in various societies, when a particular culture is the dominant culture, many times other cultures' beliefs or rites of passage or ways in which they express themselves can be dismissed or put to the side and viewed as not as important, simply because they are different than what the dominant culture may be. Have you found that in your research that this has that it continues to happen in today's society, that whoever's in charge, it's kind of their way is the way, and someone else's culture may be a little more dismissed because they are not the dominant culture when it comes to rites of passage?
Yes, I think so, definitely. I think what would be the rites of passage in the West? I mean, maybe there can be a subtle implicit assumption that the West is still the best, and that other developing cultures need to aspire toward being like Western culture. Maybe that can be still implicitly in place. So, for example, when a boy becomes, is about 17, in the West, you can start drinking, driving, and the rites of passage normally are quite destructive. To have those that badge of honor, so to speak. So the implicit sort of rites of passage that the West has now, like driving a car, being able to drink or even get drunk and start smoking, and pursuing a woman in the wrong way, in a much more self-centered way, let's say, rather than a sacrificial way. And I think that there can be an assumption, like I say, of Western culture's way of doing things, that can think that yes, that's still the best way to go. But then, when we think of marriage, which is also a type of initiation, or baptism, Christian baptism is an initiation. We've done away with those rites of passage. I mean, even birth is a rite of passage. Marriage. So the stages of the rites of passage, we don't seem to celebrate anymore in a secular society. And I think, yes, there is. I agree with you. But other cultures aren't really acknowledged for their rites of passage.
As you were talking, it just made me think of the things that we do as women, and even though I do understand that you were speaking much more about men, but that rite of passage, and you're so right, there are things that women do when it is time for baby to be born that really places that mother to be in a place of honor, because you're trying to welcome that new life into the world. Yeah. And it very much is a rite of passage. but
Yeah.
it's also one that tends to be involved in one's culture. So your expression of that, depending on what culture you are, helps you express that rite of passage. So as you were talking, like I said, I just thought about that and just saying, you are so right. I know that I looked forward to my debutante ball. I so looked forward to being the plus one of a cotillion, and just looking at that rites of passage. But again, when you were talking, it made me think about that, giving birth. And you are so right, to have my mother there and to have my grandmother there and to have those people really hold your hand and say, you're not in this alone. That is a beautiful thing. And I do pray that more men will be able to experience those types of things along their life. That is a great reminder. Thank you so much for that. Nigel, my next question for you is, I always like to give my authors an opportunity to express why they believe that their book is different or unique. There are, thousands, millions of books out there in the world, and everyone's book, I think, is as different and unique as they are, because it's an expression of who we are as an individual person. With that being said, what do you think makes your book a little different?
The uniqueness which has come out of my varied life experience. So, my journey of becoming an author, which has come out of my story, and my story is very varied. So I'm Asian, British, Caribbean for a start. So I've got a mixed bag of cultural identity. I've got 3 countries in my history. That has been part of my struggle. I've had a very marginalised existence in my 20s. I was in the care system from birth, and led a very marginalised existence and had deep identity struggles because of that. So out of that brokenness, out of that journey of brokenness for many years, the grace of God enabled me to connect with who I was becoming in my uniqueness, out of that pain and out of that brokenness. And I became like a bridge person because I empathise with different types of people, all types of different categories of people because of my variety of life experience. That is what would characterise the uniqueness of my book and of of my life experience.
Oh, I love your answer there. I think that as a fellow multicultural person, you do tend to see the lens through the various experiences of not only the things that life has given you, but through the cultures that make you who you are. And it really is a very unique place to be, because it does give you all of those layers, but it also, I think, gives you a sensitivity or an empathy, or you understand that love your brother and sister in Christ from a different perspective, because you understood that you were given that love from your cultures. So I love that answer. Well, Nigel, thank you so much for spending time with me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I think that you have truly enlightened and inspired someone today to really look at though things may be different or not necessarily how we may have initially planned them, it doesn't mean that they don't ultimately turn out to be just fine when we understand what we're given and what we ultimately can achieve. I love that you've shared with us today. Thank you so much for being on the show. Now, before I let you go, though, absolutely. Before I let you go, though, can you please remind everyone one last time, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And, of course, how do we stay in contact with you?
The title is Calling Men Out of the Cave, Nigel Mohammed. You can get a copy on Amazon or from my website, lifequesttruth.com. and you can contact me by email, thebiggerstory1@gmail.com. thebiggerstory1@gmail.com.
Thank you again, Nigel, for being a guest here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Thank you so much, Angela. I really enjoyed interacting with you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for spending some time with us here as well. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to spend it with me, and I appreciate your doing that. I hope that we have enlightened, inspired, and empowered you today. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You know what I like to do on my show. Say it with me. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want you fired up about my guest. His name is SID Cooper, and we'll be talking about his book, A Shot in the Dark. So go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Hello, Sid. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Hello. Thank you for meeting me.
Thank you so much for being on the call. Absolutely. Now, as is tradition here, we always give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves to perhaps those few folks out there that may not be familiar with you or your book. So first question to you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What makes you, you?
That's not a simple question. I've been through all sorts of types of work and occupation through my life. The last 20 or 25 years I've been teaching English at a school and privately. And as a consequence of my teaching, I introduced the idea of writing to my students, and I've had to follow my own example, and I started writing, and my books have been very well received by my students, and it was they who pressed me to publish these books.
And thank you for that, because that kind of leads me to my next question, and that is about being an author. Is it something that you've always wanted to do, but you really needed that nudge? Or did you find that perhaps with that prompting from your students, you finally decided, I think I'll take a go at it? How did becoming an author, how did that come about for you?
Well, as I told you, it came about because I was prompting my students to write, and I had to lead by example, and I began, and I found that I enjoyed it, and it's gone on from then. And in fact, I've written a total of 8 books and many short articles too.
Now, the title of your book, A Shot in the Dark, how did you come about the title of this book?
Well, because this is the way the story begins. It begins.
Now, for a Shot in the Dark, was there any particular thing that motivated you to write this book? I know for several of the authors that I've spoken with, they may be telling a personal story, and of course that's a little different. But some of them are addressing societal things that they see going on, or it's about something going on in politics or perhaps with finances. Is there any particular thing that motivated you to get this particular book out? I know your students prompted you to start writing, to be an author, but as far as this book is concerned, was there anything that nudged you in particular?
No, not really. It's just an idea. It started off by saying, a shot rang out in the small hours of the night. And from that, I followed on naturally, and the story almost wrote itself.
Now, as far as the ideal reader is concerned, would this book be appropriate for someone as young as high school, or do you think that college age and older would be a better fit?
I've used them for children as young as 8, 7, and also for adults. So it fits the whole range of ages.
Now, when I always ask the question of what is the storyline, or what is the book about, but I also give the disclaimer to the listeners, and they know what I'm going to say. Of course, we don't want you to tell how the story ends or anything like that, because we want for everyone to go out and purchase a copy of the book. But with that being said, can you tell us a little bit about the storyline or about the main character?
Well, the storyline is what's written at the back of the book. The peacefulness of the small, quiet town is disturbed in the middle of the night when a shot rings out, but when the police come to investigate, at first there are no signs of violence. Then a trace of blood is found, and it is human. There is no body, no cartridge case from the bullet. No one is brought to hospital with a bullet wound, and no one is reported missing. Detective Sergeant Rob Cording is the main character, is put in charge of the case, and he sends his men door to door to gather information from witnesses. When a week later a body is fished out of the sea, Cording begins to fit the clues together. The trail leads from the country where the crime was committed, which is never disclosed, across an ocean to Colombia, Venezuela, and Holland. So that's a very brief summary of what the story is all about.
I like it. I know a couple of the listeners as well are nodding their heads saying, "Ooh, yeah, that sounds good." Definitely some suspense and thriller. I love it. Now, what was one of the hardest things that you found in writing your story? Were there any bits of it that were more difficult to write than another?
Not really. As I say, it almost wrote itself, because each time I put down an idea and I embellished it, and then I thought, well, what would happen next? And a little bit of thought and consideration, and I came up with a follow-on, and so it went until the book was finished.
I like that, and I love that how you say it almost wrote itself, and I believe a good storyline probably does, because it's so easy to follow along what would occur. I love that. I love it. It also makes for a really good read. It really captivates the reader and brings us along on the journey. Now, speaking of that journey, is there anything in particular that you wish for the reader to take away having read your book?
I think just the interest in the way the story unfolds and all its complications, and how it's all resolved. I may add, by the way, that at the end of this book, I wrote a sequel to it, and then a further sequel, so it became a trilogy.
I like that. That is awesome. And you know, I love the fact that of all the authors that I've spoken with, the ones that have a series, they really developed the characters, and they really do. When I talk about taking us along on that journey, you do a great job of taking us along as a reader to really find out what is next. And I love that. I have not found a book trilogy that did not keep me interested as we went from book to book. So that is awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, Mr. Sid, it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, can you remind everyone, please, what is the title of this book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you?
Well, the title is A Shot in the Dark. It's available from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or direct from me. My name is Sid Cooper, and you can contact me on my email address, which is sidcooperbooks@gmail.com.
Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. My guest today is Sid Cooper, and we're talking about his book, A Shot in the Dark. I know, really good title there. Now, Mr. Sid, I want to ask this of you. Many times, we have people out there that are a little on the but side, you know, that person who's a little pessimistic. With that being said, they may say there's a lot of suspense books out there. There are a lot of thriller type books. How do you address that person when it comes to what makes your book different or unique? How would you address them?
I can only say that the books which I've written have been very well received by my students, in spite of all other books which are out, thrillers and so forth. They've liked these books, and it was they who pressed me to publish the books.
So I do understand what you're saying. It's as though your students were already that test market, if you will. They said that this was great, and you already knew that it appealed to an audience. So for those who like this type of book, that it will appeal to them as well. I love it. I love it. Now, when you are not writing, I know that many of the authors that I speak to, though they are authors, some of them are still full-time in their profession. Others are finding some other unique ways to express themselves. Some have started writing music or even started to dabble in the arts. What do you do when you are not writing?
Well, when I'm not writing, I'm reading or teaching. I still teach English, and I still teach English as a foreign language because I'm in Israel, and it's not the language of the country. And so I teach and I read.
I know reading can definitely take you on a journey to a new place, to exciting places, to walk in the shoes of another person. So I could not agree with you more in taking time to just sit and read. That is always an amazing idea. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I'd like to ask you a few questions that will help our aspiring authors out there. We get emails from them all the time where they say, Dr. Angela, we love that you think about us and that you want to hear questions from us. And the top questions that I get, I would love to ask of you. And one is, how did you determine how you would publish your book? We have the option of self-publishing, but we also have the option of going through a publishing house. What helped you determine which way you would publish your book?
Well, I was pressed by publishers, self-publishers, and they pressed me to do so. I did try directly through a few publishers, but I didn't get a positive response. I didn't try enough, perhaps only tried maybe a half a dozen. So I settled for the easy way and self-published through a self-publishing publisher.
Well, you know, I am finding that more and more people are self-publishing. It gives them the control that they're looking for, in that they can choose the price point or make sure that the story isn't changed too much or the cover is just the way that they want it to be, so on and so forth. So I can definitely understand why you would self-publish. Now, you are a successful author. Not only have you published this book, but you've published several others. When we think about being successful, for many people, they think of success, and it's directly connected to monetary things or tangible things, a large home or an expensive or fast car, so on and so forth. With that being said, how would you describe a successful author for someone trying to understand, how do I know when I will become successful as an author? How would you help an aspiring author to understand that concept?
Well, I have the advantage of having students, and it is their reaction to my publications, to my books, which has made me feel that it's successful. I can't say that I'm successful in the volume of books which my publishers have sold. They haven't sold very many at all, except to my students.
And you know, I like your answer in that I remember speaking with one author, and he said, my book is a self-help book, and it is to help someone. So if I only help that one, then the story was worth writing. And I said, you are absolutely right. I think that for so many people, they equate the success only with those or the ability to purchase those tangible things or be in possession of them. But I like how you're saying is that it is successful because the people who want it most have it. So anyone who purchases a copy and enjoys the book therefore makes it successful. I love it. I love it. I really do. Now, as far as the emotion behind writing, everyone answers this question in their own unique way, but I find that most feel the same emotion. So I want to ask you this question as well, and that is, when you were done with the editing process, you've selected the cover, it is published, and you are holding the very first copy in your hands. How did you feel in that moment of holding copy number 1 of A Shot in the Dark?
Well, I felt very pleased to have it, and when my students each of the students bought a copy, we read from it and they learn from it, and that pleased me greatly, of course, and encouraged me to continue writing, which is what I did.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I am so glad that you did. I love how we are able to sometimes take something that we didn't realize we were purposed to do, and it turns into a very beautiful and grand thing. And now you are sharing your books with the world. I love it. I love it. Well, Mr. SID Cooper, I have enjoyed my time with you here today. But before I let you go, can you remind everyone, please, of the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And, of course, how do we stay in contact with you?
Well, the name of the book is A Shot in the Dark. That's not the first book I wrote, but it's one of the books which I wrote. And it's available from Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or direct from me, SID Cooper, and I've given you the email address where you can reach me. It's SID Cooper Books, or one word, at gmail.com. If you contact me, I'll be happy to make arrangements to get a book to you.
Absolutely. Thank you again for being a guest on the show today.
You're very welcome. Thank you too.
And listeners, thank you for spending time with us here today as well. We hope that we have enlightened, inspired, and empowered you again today. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone.